Hi and welcome to my oral presentation about residential segregation in the US. I'll start to explain the residential segregation, including how and why it still exists in the US today, even after the civil rights movement. Residential segregation means that people of different races often ended up living in separate neighborhoods, even though legal segregation ended after the civil rights movement in the 1960s. This kind of division still exists in the US today. Residential segregation had existed for decades, and it was only officially challenged in 1968 when the federal government passed the Fair Housing Act, and this law made it illegal to discriminate when buying, selling, or renting homes. But before that, black families were denied home loans through something called redlining, where banks marked black neighborhoods as too risky for investment. That meant that white families could buy homes in better areas and build wealth, while black families were kept out. And over time, this created a huge economic difference that still affects who can afford to live where today. So even though the laws have changed, the effects of past discrimination are still visible, and where people live often depends on opportunities that were denied to earlier generations, and that's why residential segregation continues to shape the American society today. And now I will move on to explain what redlining really is, and how it has been used to prevent minority groups from gaining the same opportunities as white Americans. And as they tell in the video called How Redlining Prevented Black and Brown Families from Becoming Homeowners by Howard Kennedy School in 2023, the basic decision behind redlining was to determine that any community with the presence of black people or brown people or people who perhaps spoke Italian in certain parts of the country could not receive support from the homeowners loan corporation. And we have also worked with another video in class called What is Redlining by Think TVPPS from 2022, which also defines redlining as a discriminatory lending practice denying access to federally backed mortgages and loans to certain communities based on race and ethnicity. And it all started back in 1930s during the housing crisis of the Great Depression, where real estate moguls such as Springfield's Harry Kissel laid the groundwork for the National Housing Act of 1934, and from this a new federal agency was formed, which was called the Homeowners Loan Corporation, and with it residential security that became the standard to determine the best places for housing and investments. And as you can see on this card, there was some places in the US who were marked with red and green colors, and the communities with strong racially restricted deeds were given an grade A rating and identified as desirable for lending purposes. And yeah, as I said, these places were marked with a green color and yeah, on the map. Meanwhile, the communities who were marked with red color, they were seen as regardless of the economic status, where, yeah, as I said, they were given a grade D and branded as hazardous and high risk cities, and no federally backed loans would be made in these areas. So yes, the bad cities were given a grade D, and the cities who were seen as great for the investment were marked with a green A. Yes. Yes, and redlining has been used to prevent minority groups, especially Black and Brown Americans, from gaining the same opportunities as white Americans. And as explained in the videos about redlining we have worked with in class, redlining was a practice where banks and the government refused to give home loans to people living in certain neighborhoods, marked, as I said, in red on the official maps, and these areas were considered as too risky because many of them were Black, and this meant that it was extremely difficult to minorities families to buy these homes and improve their neighborhoods or move into better areas, while white families were able to get government-backed loans and build wealth through home ownership. And over time, this created, as I said earlier, a huge economic and social inequalities. And now I will move on to give a demonstration of my understanding of the topic and how it connects to the materials we have studied in class, and this including an overview of the issue facing Yonkers. In class we have worked with the film Not on My Street from 1988, which shows the conflict in the city of Yonkers, north of New York, where a federal court ordered the city to build new public housing for poor Black families in white family class neighborhoods. And for many years, all public housing had been placed in one small area, which created racial segregation. And this movie also focuses on how angry and divided the city became to be when the government tried to fix this problem, and many white resistance protested and said they didn't want Black families living on their street, and we saw public meetings full of shouting, fear, and also racism, and politicians who were too scared to lose their votes. And this connects also to what we have studied in class about residential segregation and how it still affects American society today. Even though the civil rights movement ended legal segregation, the movie Not on My Street shows that people's attitudes and fears didn't change overnight, and it's also a clear example of how racism can exist in our everyday life, not just in laws. And the main issue facing Yonkers was whether the city would follow the court's order and accept integration or keep living divided by race and class. And in the end, the film shows that real equality requires more than new houses, but it requires that people's minds changes and at some point.